So today's presentation is about the International Patient Safety Goal number 5, which is reducing the risk of healthcare associated infections. And in this, we are going to look at the intent. So we must know, and I hope we already know, that the infection prevention and control are a major challenge across the world. And the important infections that are generally in focus, especially in the accreditation programs, are the COTI, that is catheter associated urinary tract infection. We have CLABSI, that is central line associated bloodstream infection. We have pneumonias. The commonest pneumonia which is under focus is the ventilator associated pneumonia, and we have surgical site infection. So these four, the COTI, CLABSI, VAP, and SSI, are the ones which are routinely, which are required to be routinely monitored as part of the accreditation programs. And so, in fact, all three big programs, that is the JCI, the NABH, and the NQAS, they all focus on these four. However, there may be many other kind or the varieties of the healthcare associated infections, and those are for people who are interested in more details. We are today covering the International Patient Safety Goal itself, so we will not be in a position to cover these infections in great detail, but we'll see how these contribute to the goal. Central to the elimination of these is proper hand hygiene as per hand hygiene guidelines, which need to be adopted. So whenever we talk about infection control, we cannot think of infection control without having to cover or without covering the hand hygiene, because hand hygiene has been identified as one of the major contributor to the healthcare associated infections. And therefore, any discussion that you see anywhere in any platform regarding the HAIs, you will see that the hand hygiene and the standard precautions, they occupy significant part of the discussion, and this also we need to know. So this needs to be carried out in all appropriate areas. So we need to post or provide the hand hygiene guidelines. In the most commonly it is done in the pictorial forms, and we must also provide the training to the staff so that they know the significance and also are able to do this correctly. In addition, unless we provide the resources for carrying out or for doing a proper hand hygiene, there is no point talking about it. So the availability of soap, disinfectants, towel, running water, all these are important components. And along with this, the means of drying. So whether we are providing disposable towels or whatever else is provided, there can be many other ways of doing it. So unless these things are provided, we will not be able to demand compliance to the hand hygiene guidelines. The high risk areas and procedures need to be identified. So these areas and procedures are required to be identified from the infection control perspective. And typically you will find that areas like the ICU, the procedure rooms like the endoscopy room or the dressing room or the treatment rooms, or you'll have the operation theaters, you'll have the isolation wards. So these are the areas which are commonly identified as the high risk areas, and any invasive procedure which breaches the mucosa or the skin is also identified as the high risk procedure. So we need to list these procedures and also need to identify what are the risks associated with these procedures in those specific areas. Insertion and care bundles must be implemented. So those of you who have had exposure to the HAI learning material or training material, or you may have attended other programs, you would have heard this word called the insertion and the care bundles. Now, care bundles are, or the bundles are, the clubbed interventions. Each kind of infection, for example, COTI or CLABSI or SSI or VAP, has a clubbed interventions. That means set of activities that need to be carried out. And these activities, when carried out appropriately, have been proven to improve the outcomes. insofar as the HAI is concerned. So we have these bundles to be implemented, and they are in two varieties. One is the insertion bundle, which means the activities and the methods that are to be used while putting a central line or putting a catheter or the ventilator. And then we have the care bundles, so or the maintenance bundles. So then once the device, the catheter or the central line or the ventilator is in situ, then how it should be maintained. So the care bundles and the insertion and the maintenance, both bundles are there, and they have to be implemented. Now, one important thing that we need to know about these bundles is that we should not modify the contents of these bundles. I have seen in a lot of hospitals where people implement, but then based on either a convenience or someone's requirement, the activities in these bundles are modified. So in one hospital, I saw that in the VAP bundle, they have removed the sedation vacation component from the maintenance bundle for VAP. Now, if you do that, if you modify it, now this bundle is no longer the same. These bundles, with the set of activities which are defined in these bundles or included in these bundles, have been tested statistically and have been proven to be effective. Now, the moment we modify it and change one or the other component, then it interferes, or rather, then the modified version is no longer validated. So then there is no it is not then expected to give you the benefit as the actual care bundle is supposed to give. So therefore, we should not modify it. The only component that you can modify possibly is the format, and possibly the areas where the patient identification is recorded. So modification should not be done. These bundles need to be implemented the way they have been designed. So bundle is a small set of evidence-based interventions for a defined patient segment or a population and care setting that, when implemented together, will result in a significantly better outcomes than when implemented individually. So these are set of evidence-based interventions, and we should not modify this set. Now, the next is that we need to adopt the current evidence-based hand hygiene guidelines. I'm sure there is enough material available. In fact, the WHO also has a free hand hygiene program. The Quality Council of India on their learner platform Quest also have a free program, online program, where one can look at hand hygiene guidelines and how to do this. So this is something which has to be done, and the correct procedure must be known to everybody in the hospital. Then implementing a hand hygiene program, which includes providing resources, that is the soap, water, hand rub, etc., providing training, monitoring it, and tracking the performance against a benchmark. So this all is included in the hand hygiene program. Then we ensure the use of guidelines-based hand washing or hand disinfection procedures. So we have the 6 steps in hand washing and in the hand disinfection or the hand rub use, and these must be implemented correctly. I'm sure all of us are aware of it, and there is no need to re-emphasize it. But because we are talking about the IPSG 5, which deals with the HAI, so we need to just have a quick look at it. Leaders need to identify the priority areas for improvement improvement in the healthcare associated infections. So now, what are the priority areas? Which means we need to identify where these HAIs are happening more. The high risk areas we talked about earlier. We need to identify the procedures which are associated with higher risk or the higher incidence of HAIs, and then we do the interventions. The leaders to identify and implement evidence-based interventions. We talked about the bundles, we talked about the hand hygiene guidelines. And evidence-based interventions are evaluated for compliance and improvement in outcomes. So it is not only necessary to implement the interventions, but it is also necessary to evaluate them periodically. So you could have a audit of the interventions and how these are being implemented. So you could audit the bundle implementation, or you could audit the hand hygiene implementation, and then establish benchmarks for your own hospital. We had a discussion on how to establish a benchmark in one of the presentations in this series, the Saturday series itself. So the benchmarks are established, and based on that benchmark, we track our performance, and then periodically see how this performance can be improved. So these are the standard operating procedures that need to be defined for IPSG 5. So we need to have hand hygiene guidelines, which will include the components, the procedures, the training requirements, the repeating requirements. I mean, how often this training should be repeated for your hospital staff? You could do it once in 3 months, every month, once in a year, depending on how good or how what is the depth of implementation in your hospital. Then we look at the insertion and the care bundle guidance. So there are specific, these care bundles are freely available. They can be taken from the CDC Atlanta, which is the most authentic source. So CDC website is a very good resource. We should take it from there. Identification of high risk areas in the hospital and the identification of high risk procedures in the hospital. Guidance for monitoring the use of interventions. So we need to have a written guidance. That means a procedure defined how the bundle implementation will be monitored, which basically means that somebody trained will review it periodically, and there will be an audit that will be carried out whether these bundles are being implemented correctly. So this is about the international patient safety goal number 5. And now we come to the next one, the last international patient safety goal, which is number 6, reducing the risk of patient harm resulting from falls. So if you look at these 6 international patient safety goals, which have been widely adopted all across the world, they focus on 6 prominent issues which are contributed to the most patient safety events in the hospital. Whether it is patient identification or whether it is effective communication, we talked about the safe surgery, high risk medications, the HAIs, and now the falls. So many injuries to patients in hospitals are a result of falls, and this is typically something which is also grossly underreported, especially in our setting. So if you really ask a hospital, my experience of doing the NABH assessments for last 11 years, you ask a hospital how many falls you have had in the hospital. So typically the answer will be, okay, we had just 1 or 2 maybe in the entire year. Now that's not true, because patient fall is a fairly common incident that happens in the hospital. It is just that it is not reported by the patients or the patient's family members themselves, because they may not be aware that it needs to be reported. Many times the staff doesn't report it because there may be the negative connotations or the repercussions for this, so they don't report it. Sometimes it gets reported, but in order to make the data look good, they can also get kind of brushed under the carpet. So essentially what happens is that the faults are happening, but they do not get reflected in the data, and therefore we do not know the extent of the problem, and accordingly we cannot do the correct intervention. So therefore this is something that we need to be aware, and when we implement systems in the hospital, we should make endeavor to ensure that these requirements are put in place so that the reporting is happening. Now the most common problem with reporting is that a person reporting might get a penalty or a punishment or some kind of an adverse outcome. That is something that needs to be avoided. We have discussed this in other presentations as to how to have a non-punitive environment where these things will be reported and then they can be corrected. So the risk is related to the patient. There may be issues with the patient himself or herself. The it is also related to the situation and the location. So patient-related risks include the history of falls, the use of medication, alcohol consumption, gait or balance disturbances, or there may be visual impairments, there may be altered mental status, there may be physical disability, so the patient is prone to fall. The patients initially assessed to be at low risk for falls may become high risk due to a procedure that they have undergone in the hospital. So what it implies is that uh, even when we have a system in place in the hospital where we are assessing the fall risk for the patients, and we identify that this patient is at low risk of fall, this low risk can become high risk due to a procedure that the patient will undergo during his stay in the hospital. So anyone, if I can know what is the method to assess the risk of falls, the risk assessment for falls, what is the method to do this? Anyone?
Sir, we can use Morse scale.
Correct. So there are scales available, and again, like bundles, the scales have to be used as such. They are validated tools. We are not expected to modify them in any way. So the scales are there. Morse scale is one such commonest scale where you have risk parameters, and based on those parameters, you make an assessment, and that assessment results in a score. So if the score is 0 or less than 24, then it is considered the low risk. 24 to 45 is the high risk, and above 45 is the uh, I mean above 45 is the high risk, and 24 to 45 is the medium risk or the low risk. So that is how the score is available, and you can use this score to grade the risk of fall in the patients. This needs to be done for all the patients who come to the hospital, whether it is the OPD, IPD, or even for daycare procedures. So many patients require reassessment because, as we discussed, that as the patient undergoes procedures and treatments in the hospital, a low risk person can become a high risk person. So fall risk criteria identify patients at risk of falls, and this is typically done by using a scale. Criteria and any intervention applied are documented. So once we have applied a criteria, we have used a scale like Morse scale, then we need to record the score. So on admission, the fall risk assessment score was this much. Then second day, third day, fourth day, post surgery, post medication. So we need to have uh, not only the regular reassessments of these scores, but also these to be recorded. Because when we do this, this is the way we tell the next shift staff that this person who was low risk in the morning shift has now become a high risk because of the anesthesia or the surgical procedure, and therefore the care has to get modified accordingly. The criteria facilitate the continuity of care. So when when the handover is happening, this is it refers to that. The hospital evaluates patient falls, takes action to reduce the risk of falling and the risk of injury should a fall occur. So these things are required to be in place. So first the evaluation of risk, then evaluating the patient falls. So once we have assessed a patient to be at high risk, we need to look after that patient in a manner that he does not suffer a fall. When a fall happens, then we need to evaluate what are the injuries, why it happened, and what could have been done to prevent it. Then we see whether the injury has actually occurred, and if the injury has occurred, then there has to be a corrective or some action for addressing that injury as well. So the hospital establishes a fall risk reduction program based on the policies and the procedures that include fall risk assessment and periodic patient reassessment. We talked about it. Measurements and interventions implemented to reduce the fall risk for those identified. So once we have identified that this particular patient is prone to fall, or this particular situation will make patients prone to fall, or this is a location where fall happens frequently or is likely to happen, then we need to take some action on that. So what could be the patients we've covered? That the patient who might have disabilities or under the influence of drugs, medications, or other reasons, the patient can be at high risk. The situations can be to do with the housekeeping activities in the hospital. The situations can be to do with the combination of patient and the location itself. And then we can have locations, for example, areas which are poorly lit, or the staircases or the floor where it is damaged. So those locations can become the potential sites for falls. The special situations may pose a risk of fall. So we need to identify these situations. So patient being moved from emergency department to the imaging for tests. So when we are moving such a patient on a patient trolley or on a stretcher, then how the patient is being moved, whether the patient is secured, if the side rails have been raised, or whether the side rails are there. We need to look at these things. Special locations may pose the risk of fall. So we can have a particular department, for example, the physical medicine and rehabilitation, where it is expected that the patients will have some limitations of mobility and they may be more prone to falls. So there a special precaution is needed. All inpatients to be assessed using the appropriate tools, and we had the example of Morse scale. The outpatients are screened for fall risk. So there is a difference. The tool is used for assessment, and screening can be done on a simplified criteria rather than using the elaborate tool, because OPD typically will be a high footfall area, and it may not be practical to do a full assessment for all the patients. So we need to have a screening criteria, and based on that screening criteria, the staff can be trained, whether the reception staff, nursing staff, or even the GDAs or the people who are working in the OPD. So they should be able to identify a person who is prone to fall or who might be at a risk higher than others. So screening, for example, in the OPD or assessment has to be done in the inpatient. So these two we've differentiated already. So the implementation is done by implementing the processes. In fact, by defining the processes for assessing the inpatients for fall risk, and then implementing these processes for reassessment of inpatients at risk. Measures to reduce the fall risk for those identified inpatients, situations, or locations within the hospital. The locations are typically identified during a facility safety round. Similarly, the situations are also identified during the facility safety round, and the patients are identified using the screening and the assessment. We should document what patient interventions have been done. Implement processes for screening outpatient using tools. So there are screening tools also available, and this is something that we are not all of us are doing it in our hospitals, and it may be necessary for you to have a relook at this, whether the screening is being done in the OPD, because you can't say that you have a fall prevention program in the hospital and that program does not include OPD. That is not acceptable. When fall risk is identified in screening, we need to implement the interventions to reduce the risk of fall and then document those interventions. So how do we do this? So once we have identified, like for a patient in the OPD has been screened that okay, he is at a higher risk of fall. So firstly, that patient needs to be identified. He has to be given priority in various processes in the OPD, for example, consultations or whatever else is being done. Then it may be necessary to have a person accompany that high risk patient in the OPD areas. And also then we look at whether the OPD facility itself is designed in a manner which promotes prevention of falls. Implement measures to reduce the fall risk in situations or locations in the OPDs. These measures we have discussed in some detail, not too much of a detail, but yes, we did mention many things that can be done. So we need to have a standard operating procedure for fall risk reduction in the inpatient as well as in the OPD. So with this, we have completed the discussion on the International Patient Safety Goal. I'm now going to close this screen sharing and then we will have the opportunity to ask questions as well as then have further discussion. So the questions are welcome, anyone. Let me also have a look at the chat box because there are some questions that have been put there.
Good afternoon,
Okay,
sir.
so yes, madam.
Can we get all goals, patient safety goals in a presentation form so that we can go through all one by one?
Revati ma'am, this presentation for last 2 sessions have already been shared with anyone who wanted it. So we could share it again, and today's presentation will also be shared.
Thank you so
So
much, sir.
yes, presentation will be there. Okay, there's a question by Pravina in the chat box. Is it important to employ educated nurses to achieve infection prevention? Well, Pravina ji, please mute your microphone, the others who are not required to speak. So, Pravina ji, your question is whether the nurses should be employed. Yes, in fact, everybody in the hospital needs to know about the infection control and infection prevention activities. Typically, we have an infection control nurse who is assigned by this designation called ICN, or the infection control nurse, and this person then looks after the infection control and prevention activities. So yes, a person has to be assigned. Shweta Raj has asked, can we use insertion and care bundles together in the same checklist? Yes. You can. You can have the same a common checklist where first part is the insertion and the second part is the maintenance. Only thing is ki insertion part is only required every time insertion is done, and the maintenance part will be required daily or maybe in every shift. So you see how your hospital wants to implement it, but it is possible to implement it together in the same checklist. Dr. Mahinder has asked, slides not visible. I hope you were able to see it. I mean, I didn't get this complaint from anyone else. In any case, if you give me the email, the PowerPoint presentation will be shared. Okay, should we? Revati ji has asked, should we to capture the fall rates only for patients or can capture for staff? Well, the International Patient Safety Goal deals with the fall risk for the patients only. But if your staff are also prone to fall, then you must address that area where the falls are happening, because there must be something really wrong there which needs to be corrected. Any other scale to assess fall other than Morse scale? Madam, Morse scale is the most common one that a lot of people use. It is also the simplest one to use. So that is why it is used by everyone. There may be other scales. I mean, offhand, I can't tell you which ones are there, but I'm sure we can make an effort to search and then kind of share that the other scales. One of the important thing to know is that we need to have a scale which is validated. There is no point. I mean, you could also make a scale for yourself, but unless you validate in a system setting, it will not be beneficial. Morse scale by far is also the one which is rather it is called modified Morse scale, which is in use in large number of institutions. So over a period of time, this has become validated and better, and therefore it is a good idea to use that scale. Yes, but you can have other scales as well. There are, but often I won't be able to give you the reference. Okay, someone wants a presentation, it will be given. Eugene Alexander has asked which scale to be used for assessing pediatric patients. Yes, that's a good question, and I think we've been discussing this topic on so many occasions. But yes, this question has not come to us so far. But Eugene, it's like this. A pediatric patient typically will be classified as the vulnerable patient in the hospital, and so you will have all the systems which are designed for a vulnerable patient, and one of the vulnerability is fall. So in that sense it is covered, but specifically which scale should be used, I need to really check this and tell you if there is a specific scale for pediatrics.
Maybe
So I'll
Humpty Dumpty
remember this.
pediatric scale, sir. Sir, adding on to you, Humpty Dumpty pediatric scale we have for the fall tool. That
Okay,
can be
great.
even we use that, sir. In case if anything is there, other than that, you can add on to it.
So we are
Uh,
also using the same Humpty
so it's
Dumpty
a
for pediatric.
correct. So there is a scale. So I think Eugene, your question is answered. So there is a Humpty Dumpty scale for pediatric patients where the fall risk is assessed. Yes, that's one. And also thank you. It's addition to my own information today. Chandresh ji has asked for
Sir,
presentation,
excuse
and a lot of people have asked for presentation. It will be shared. Abhijit has asked, fall reporting is for patient only or also for the relatives also, or and is with Papa. See, Mr. Abhijit, or is it Dr. Abhijit? I can't make out from here. Fall should not happen. I mean, the very fact that the patients are prone to fall, and they do suffer falls, and their relatives also suffer falls, then we should look at our facility why it is happening. I mean, that one particular area may be really prone for such events, which because they are happening again and again. Since we are talking about the patient safety and we are talking about the international patient safety goal, so the entire focus is on the patients. But yes, the common sense says that you should not have anyone falling. Why only patients? So yes, this needs to be addressed. Okay, Uma Maheshwari wanted the presentation. Yes, it will be given. Varghese Joseph has asked for all PPT. So please give your email ID. We will share it. We shared it earlier also. We will share it again. No issue. Jagruti Kura has said, how often should we do the OPD screening? I think every visit, because when a person comes today and then he again comes after 2 days or maybe after a day, a lot of things would have changed in between. So a screening is essentially a rather simplified version of risk stratification. So we should use the simplest form available so that it can be done quickly, because OPD, it is expected that you will have large number of patients. So you should not implement a procedure which is very, very complex and takes time to complete. Then you will not be able to do much in that case.
Yes, sir. We have a fall screening tool which is there for the OPD patients, which have only three components, sir, with low
Correct.
risk and high risk, and with intervention.
So not only the number of parameters to be assessed should be less in the screening, you should have categories also less. So
Done,
just
sir.
to maybe a low risk and a high risk is very effective, so that a person who's
Yes,
doing it can do it quickly.
yes, sir.
You cannot have a one-page form to be filled. I mean, that will really choke the OPD. You'll have a lot of people just scribbling about it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So all those who were not able to see the slides, I'm sorry. I only hope that if it was pointed out. See, the issue is when I'm presenting on the screen, it is difficult to also keep track of the chat box. So it's a good idea to speak up in between and say that the PowerPoint slides are not visible, because at the end of it, it is very little I can do in this. But yes, it will be shared definitely. All those who have asked for it, they'll get it. Okay. Do we need to?
Sir,
Let me just quickly go through these the chat box questions, and then I'll ask everyone to if they have a question. Okay. So
okay,
do
sir.
we need to relook on or retook? I'm sure it is relook on staff patients in view of SARS-CoV type infection in future. Sir, I think we will limit our discussion only to the IPSG that we are discussing today, and in the healthcare associated infections, SARS-CoV will also be one of them. So you will need to have systems in place where we are able to do some kind of a screening for patients who are visiting the hospital. Testing everyone will be expensive, may not be practical. It is time consuming. So doing a proper RT-PCR, well, I don't think it's a good idea. But there are a lot of rapid antigen tests are available, and a lot of hospitals are already doing it. So the COVID-19 can also be included in the list of HIs that we are going to address. Okay. I think the questions are over. So, okay. Uma Maheshwar has asked, is there a code to coin for patient fall as well? I think we have enough codes in the hospital. I mean, from code blue to code orange, black, all colors are already taken. So let's not look at any more codes. Let's only look at that there is a fall prevention strategy and there is a fall reduction methods that have been identified and implemented. In any case, there is nothing which needs to be done in case of a fall in a manner of a code. So I think we need not have a code for that, but all these steps will be required. Okay, any more questions? There were some questions coming up. Yes, please. Anyone? No questions? I thought some people were asking questions in between. Okay, so Revati ji has asked, should we do fall risk assessment for all patients or we can do it only for vulnerable patient? I think you, madam, you'll have to do it for all patients, all inpatients, because the fall risk assessment itself will tell you who are the vulnerable patients. So it has to be for everyone. We can't be selective in this inpatient. In the OPD, a simple screening is sufficient. Okay, so are there any more questions, or we call this presentation for the day? Okay, so a couple of announcements for everyone, and of course I have also shared in the email. This would have gone to everyone in last 2 days. We will take a year-end break for 3 weeks from now. So the next Saturday, that is 19th and 26th of December, there will be no live session on Saturday, and in the first week of January as well. So 3 weeks we are taking a break, and after that the Rafa Live will come back again for everyone, and it will continue thereafter for on every Saturday. That is the announcement number 1. The announcement number 2 is that the enrollment in the Rafa Learners portal, where we have online courses, there will be a discount window every month from 1st of the month to 7th of the month, and for everyone a discount of 10% will be available. So this can be used and the enrollments can take place accordingly. For the Research Foundation members, the 25% discount that we have been giving so far for all members is continuing, and this discount will be available again for them from 1st of the month to 7th of the month. During rest of the month, the regular price registration will be open, but for these 7 days, there will be a special consideration, and this has been done because there was a demand like that, and we also needed to kind of streamline our course enrollment system. So that is how it has been done. This will be applicable for all new enrollments beginning 1st of January 2021. Hopefully, new year will be a lot better than the year we have this time, 2020. So with the new year, we'll have this little improvement in this registration process, which will give a lot of not only benefit, but also streamline our systems as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. So wish you a happy new year, and we meet in the new year with the new Research Foundation's live program on Saturdays, 3 p.m. Thank you very much, and all the best.